Hey guys, this is Lori Poole with the post-production edition of Shutter Magazine. In this month's issue, my article was on post-production techniques for same-day sales. And basically the gist of the article was on focusing on ways to streamline your post-production so that you can get your clients back into the studio for in-person sales the same day as their session. Now, getting clients back in for same-day sales, it helps with the client experience. They're more excited. And it helps with your workflow because you just get everything done all in one day. So there's a lot of benefits to doing this. But in order to be able to accomplish same-day sales, obviously you have to have a pretty tight and streamlined workflow for your post-production. So I wanted to demonstrate a couple of the principles that we talked about in the article. In this video, we're going to be focusing a little bit on how to create your import presets for Lightroom, and I'm also going to demonstrate how to use Portraiture, which is my preferred skin retouching software. So let's jump into our first image. So what you can see here in this very first image, I'm going to turn on the loop information here, and you can see that this is actually a raw image. You can see the .arw here, and all of the images that I'm about to show you are straight out of camera. So this has had no edits to it yet. And when we jump over to the develop module, I'm going to hit D on my keyboard, you'll see the same thing here. Everything is exactly as shot as it came out of the camera. So nothing's been applied yet. So one thing we talked about in the article is that it is important to have your images be pretty close to what you want to see right out of camera if you're going to be doing same-day sales. You don't really have time to be doing really heavy, extensive edits, so they need to be pretty sharp straight out of camera. So this is my image here straight out of camera, and what you want to do to start developing your own presets is pay attention to any edits that you're doing routinely to a good majority of your images. So, for example, I shoot in studio. All of this is done with controlled lighting, and I know that for my studio lighting, I tend to like my white balance to be slightly on the warm and magenta side. That's just my personal style. So if we come over here, we've got our little white balance slider. You see that you can slide it way up, you can slide it way down, so it's going to go anywhere from warm to cool. And on the tint slider, you're going to go anywhere from magenta to green. I'm just going to do a quick reset here. And I know from the notes that I've taken in developing my images that my average white balance where I like to see my images lands at around 5100 for the temp and around 33 for the tint. So like I said, a little warm, little magenta, it adds the mood that I like. Now, this is something because it's something that I do over and over again to all of my images to get them consistent, I can create a preset for. In order to create a preset, you're going to come over here to the left side of the screen, and you're going to click this little plus button where it says Add New Preset, and click on Create Preset. Then you can type in whatever name you want to give it. So just so I know later, this is for Shutter Magazine, and this is my white balance preset. Okay, so give it a name, something that you'll know what it means, right? Then the first thing you want to do is come down here and click the Check None button. That's going to clear all of your check marks off of all of these different changes that you might have made to your image. The only one that's going to remain checked is your process version, and that's so that it's editing all of your images to the same process version within Lightroom. So you want to leave that one checked, and then you want to check only the box for the setting that you want to save. In this particular instance, we're talking about white balance, so I'm going to check the white balance box, and I'm going to hit Create. Now over here, you can see where that preset was added. Now, a cool thing about these presets is as you make them, you can actually just hover your mouse over the different presets to get a preview of what they would look like on your image before they've actually been applied. So if we now reset this image, so see I've gone back to my white balance as shot, then I come over here and click Shutter Mag White Balance. I click on it, it'll apply it, and now this white balance is applied to the image. Okay? So from there, I started keeping track of all the different edits that I was doing that are more from a stylistic standpoint, right? We don't want to do any corrections that are like exposure or anything like that, because every image is going to need slightly different edits there. And that's where I got confused for a long time, is how do you create a preset if you're fixing your images? So your import presets are really going to be more based on your photographic style and how you want the images to look, as opposed to corrections. Corrections you're still going to do on an image by image basis. Okay, so white balance is something that I noticed I was doing pretty consistently. As I mentioned, the 5100 and 33 on the temp and tint. Another thing that I noticed is that I liked my images to have a little more contrast, a little more punch, and the way that I like to achieve that was with the tone curve. So the tone curve allows you to edit different parts of your histogram. So you've got your shadows, your midtones, and your highlights. So you can pull down your shadows, you can bump up your highlights. You know, that's kind of a popular combination, not to this extreme that I've just done, but usually people are deepening their shadows, brightening the highlights. On the other hand, maybe you want your shadows to be really milky. Maybe that's your style. So you can do something like that with your tone curve. I'm going to do a quick reset. What I found is that I wanted just a little more punch in the blacks. So I pull this down to around 4.3. It's subtle, but it's just, like I said, just adds a little more punch to the image. So again, I can come over here and create a preset just for tone curve. Now, if you were paying attention earlier, when I just reset the tone curve, I actually reset the whole image, so we lost our white balance edit. So if I reset everything, I can now start stacking these. So I can add the white balance and I can add the tone curve and start stacking them together. That's why you want to uncheck any of those other boxes so that you can allow these to start combining. Okay? Now, I also know from the camera and lenses that I use and the lighting situations that I work in that I usually like to add a little bit of noise removal and a little bit of sharpening. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually zoom in to the image so that we can see it at 100%, and you can see that this image actually is a bit noisy. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use this luminance slider over here. Luminance is essentially your black and white grain, whereas color is your color grain. And I'm mostly seeing luminance noise in this particular image. If you hold down the Alt key when you touch this slider, it'll quickly show you a preview in black and white, but it allows you to see the noise separately from variations in color tone. So you can slide this up, you can go too far and make her look really plastic and creamy, slide it back down to 0 and you see all that noise come back. I found that with my images, I was usually setting it somewhere between like mid-60s to mid-70s for the noise reduction. So I would set that somewhere around right there. Now, when you take out noise, it does sometimes have the effect of making the image look a little soft. Plus, most images, unless you already have sharpening turned on in camera, which you can see it's already default set to 40, you're going to need to add a little bit of sharpening anyway. So what you want to do is you want to hold down your Alt key again and start dragging this masking slider. What you'll see is that the whole image turns white. And what that means is that it is showing you white everywhere where it's applying sharpening. So that means it's applying sharpening to this entire image. As I slide it up, it starts masking out parts of the image that don't have as much detail. And you can slide this up until you get to just the parts of the image that you want to sharpen. So now when you get to something like here, you're not applying sharpening to the noise grain and the texture on the walls in the background and little things that you don't necessarily want sharpened. So I tend to set my masking somewhere in the upper 70s, something like here. And then holding down the Alt key, I will also drag the amount so that, again, it converts it to black and white, and you can see we can go too far and sharpen everything. We can go not far enough and everything's a little soft, but you can set your amount to whatever works for you. Now, again, with the way that I shoot, I tend to be somewhere in the 50s to 60s, so somewhere around here. Okay, so now we can do a quick toggle on and off. This little light switch will turn off those settings that we've just applied so that you can see there's all of that noise there, and then we turn it back on, the noise is gone, and we've sharpened just the details of the image. So because I'm usually applying both of these at the same time, I went ahead and made one preset that is noise and sharpening. So that I can apply all at once with the click of a button as well. All right, the last thing that I like to do to my images, just from a stylistic standpoint, is I like to add a little bit of a vignette or a little bit of darkening around the edge of the images. Now, vignette is something that can get overdone really quickly, so I like to keep mine subtle. But because I am trying to enhance the shadowy feel to my images, I do feel that the vignette helps with that. So I set my vignette to about -19, and I set my midpoint, I make it a little bigger so it doesn't encroach too much on the image, so I set it to +60. And then you can see over here I've got a preset for that as well. So basically, if we reset this image to square one, we added white balance, we added a tone curve, we added noise removal and sharpening, and then we added a vignette. So these are the things that I noticed that I was pretty much routinely doing to every image. Now, beyond these, of course, I was doing some basic exposure tweaks, and I might have to straighten some, I might have to crop some, but those are going to be on a per image basis. Whereas these edits, I noticed I was doing them to just about every image. So to really speed up my workflow, I basically created one meta preset that had all of these features combined. The way to do that is turn on all of those presets like we just did, and then you go to Create Preset, give it a name where you're going to know what it is, your meta, mega, preset, whatever you want to call it. And then again, you're going to check just the boxes of all the things that you did. So we did white balance, we did sharpening, we did noise removal, we did a vignette, and we did a tone curve. Okay, so if we check just these and make sure we don't check anything else that we didn't mean to include, now we have a preset that will apply all of these things at once. So we're going to hit Create. I'm going to go back and reset this whole image, and then we're going to do Meta Preset, and it applies all of those at once. So you can now see we've got the vignette, we've got our tone curve, and we've got our white balance, and I passed up noise and sharpening, but you can see those were applied as well. So you can see it applies all of those at once. Now the really cool thing is that when we go back to actually import our images, we can apply all of these at once. But the tricky thing to wrap your mind around is, is this something that you can apply routinely to a lot of different images across different situations? So what I want to do here is jump over to these other images. These are all, again, straight out of camera. You can see this one has had edits applied to it by that little plus minus down here, and these have not had edits applied to them. And you can actually see some of these down here are actually pretty green because of the lights that I use here in studio. That's why I add so much magenta. So I'm showing you guys the real deal raw images right out of camera. Now, if we select all of these by doing a shift click, open up this little thing here, and we're going to go to Saved Preset, User Presets, and I called it Meta Preset here. I actually already had it saved as Lori's Boudoir Mix, so those are the same, but let's just click Meta Preset, and we should see all of those changes pop in. Now, these images are still going to need some basic tweaks, but you can at least see here now that we have a consistent white balance throughout, and we have a consistent contrast and vignette and moodiness throughout. Now from here, our editing becomes so much easier. So if we feel it's a little underexposed, we can actually use our quick develop over here to pop in 1/3 of an exposure here, maybe 2/3 on that one. This one was intentionally shot into the dark, so it's going to be a little darker and moodier. But you can see that it becomes really easy now just to do some basic exposure tweaks on these. Now, these images are from 3 different sessions and shot at different points throughout the session. So there's been outfit changes, there's been camera setting changes, all different kind of changes happening throughout, but you can see really quickly how easy it was to edit those once we had a baseline based on that import preset. So that's kind of the idea here, is you can actually apply these across the board. You apply them on import and save some time. Now, the last thing that I like to do after I've applied my global edits and then my individual tweaks to these images is I like to run them through a skin retouching software called Portraiture. There are a handful of different skin retouching softwares out there on the market, but Portraiture is the one that I prefer. The great thing about Portraiture is that you can actually apply them in an entire batch to all of the images from your set. However, I'm not going to do that in the video just because it would be really boring to sit here and watch the software run. So I'm going to choose one image that I think would be a good example of what Portraiture can do, and we'll watch it run. So if I were going to edit it on a full set, I would shift-click all of the images, right-click, edit in Imagenomic Portraiture. Instead, I'm just going to do it on the one image. So same basic process, right-click, edit in Imagenomic Portraiture. Now you'll see over here a little box pops up that gives you some options for essentially how big of a file size you want. So what file format you want, color space, whether you want 16-bit or 8, what file resolution you want. Now I like to run them in TIFF. I change it down to Adobe RGB just for it to go a little bit faster, and I do set it to 300 dpi on the resolution because I know later that that's what I'm going to want ultimately for printing. You'll notice here that it is asking to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. Because we've been working on RAW files this entire time, it can't edit the pixels directly on the original RAW file. So it does have to create that copy, and it's going to create it in the form of a TIFF. Now, once I click edit, it's going to fire up Portraiture in a separate window, and it is a little resource heavy. The first time that I filmed this video, it actually caused my audio to cut in and out while it was running. So I'm going to go ahead and click edit and let it open up, and then once it's done doing the majority of the work, I'll go ahead and start explaining what it's doing. Okay, so you should have been able to see in Lightroom that it did create that separate TIFF and it stacked it with the original file. Now what it's done here is it's showing us the before image on the left and the after image on the right. And it's guessing on what tones to apply the softening to. We can see that by the little mask over here. If we don't like the mask, or we just want to make sure it really got the right tones for this particular image, you can go over here to your eyedropper, and you're going to click on the brightest skin tone that you can find, which I think is right here on the end of her nose. And you can see over in the mask preview how this will change as I hover over different areas. So once I click the highlight, then the mouse changes to an eyedropper with a plus. So we're going to add on a shadow portion of her skin. I would say the shadows would be here along the bridge of the nose, underneath the nose, or maybe over here on the temple. But basically wherever you think the darkest area of skin is that is going to need softening. So we're giving it a range from highlight to shadow, and we should now see that, that mask update accordingly. Okay, so I'm going to put my eyedropper back. Then I'm going to come down here and zoom in, and we should see it render. Okay, so the before again is on the left, the after is on the right. This one's pretty dramatic. You should be able to see the difference by comparing them, but sometimes you're not 100% sure, or you just want to be able to see a quick before and after. You can click and hold on the after side. So if I click down and hold, it converts it to the before. When I let go, we now get the after. So before, after, before, after. I can do this all day. It's so much fun to see these before and afters. So this isn't going to fix every little thing that needs retouching. We can see a little makeup splotchiness here on the end of her nose, a couple of little blemishes here and there that are eventually going to need Photoshop. But what this does do is it takes out about 90% of the work, and it does it extremely quickly. But basically, it allows you to show your clients a semi-finished image that is going to look better than showing them the straight raw. So for those of you who are really uncomfortable showing your clients unretouched images, but you do want to do same-day sales, this is a good compromise to be able to do. So I'm going to click OK, and it's going to go ahead and apply all of these changes to that TIFF and stack it right back in Lightroom. Okay, so that wasn't too terrible. We had a whole of maybe 7 seconds to get those results that we had. Once you get the hang of this, you're not going to be sitting there clicking before and after like I was doing, so the whole process actually goes extremely quickly. When you're batch editing, you really only need to click those highlights and shadows, just check the masks on a couple of images, and then you should be able to apply it to the whole batch, and it'll work pretty well. So let's compare these again. Go ahead and pull it up. This is the after, this is the before. Now obviously we won't want the client seeing both of those, so what you can do is just right click, go to stacking, collapse stack, and now you'll only have the finished images on top. At this point, you're now ready for your in-person sales. So if you do sales straight out of Lightroom, you're already ready to go because those TIFFs are already brought back in. Otherwise, if you do your sales in a third-party software like Fundy or Enview, you'll want to render these out as JPEGs to put into your sales software. But that's basically it. We get it right in camera, we make use of really good presets, we run them through Portraiture, and you're good to go. Now, your timeline on Portraiture, just to give you a rough idea, I would say for a full portrait session, it'll take, once you click OK and tell it to start rendering, for me it usually takes about 20 to 30 minutes, and that's for a proof set of, I would say, 50 to 80 images. So when you're doing same-day sales, a lot of times you really don't get much of a break. That's really going to be your perfect time to go take a break, eat lunch at your desk, run out and go grab some food, stretch, and get that break before your clients come back in. But it's actually so fast, you're going to want to take advantage of it. So guys, that's it. I hope this really gave you some good ideas on how to start doing same-day in-person sales by taking advantage of all these little shortcuts that Lightroom and these other softwares have to offer. I hope to see you next month here at Shutter Magazine. Until then, bye for now.